This is not a story about a mushroom cloud. You've seen that photograph so many times it has stopped meaning anything. This is a story about the decisions, specific decisions made by specific people that put Miyoko on that street at 8:15 in the morning, and what those decisions produced, and what the world built on top of them. We're going to go through every layer, the science, the politics, the men who tried to stop it, the men who didn't, and the 80 years of consequences that followed. Don't look away. These people deserve better than that. By the summer of 1945, the Pacific War was consuming human beings at a rate that is almost impossible to process. The Battle of Okinawa, which ended just weeks before the Enola Gay took off, killed between 110,000 and 150,000 Japanese soldiers and civilians, and more than 12,000 Americans. In 82 days, military planners staring at those numbers, and then at the casualty estimates for a land invasion of Japan, were looking at figures ranging from 250,000 to over 1 million American dead. Japanese casualties in the millions. The war was not winding down. By every measurable indicator, it was accelerating towards something catastrophic. Japan had not surrendered after Germany collapsed in May. Their military doctrine, documented in captured planning files, called for every man, woman, and child capable of holding a weapon to resist invasion. The government was stockpiling bamboo spears for civilians. School children were being trained. And yet, here's where the history gets genuinely complicated. There were voices within the Japanese government who knew the war was lost. Emperor Hirohito was quietly searching for an exit. A small civilian faction was exploring whether the Soviet Union might mediate a peace settlement. The United States intercepted those diplomatic cables. This is confirmed in the declassified Magic Intercepts program. Truman's advisors knew Japan was reaching out to Moscow. What they did with that knowledge, whether alternative paths to ending the war were seriously pursued or deliberately foreclosed, historians are still debating. I'm not going to pretend the answer is clean. What I can tell you is the path that was chosen. It starts with a letter, August 2nd, 1939. Albert Einstein, who had fled Nazi Germany and was living on Long Island, signed a letter to President Roosevelt. It was drafted largely by physicist Leo Szilard, who warned that Germany was pursuing nuclear fission and that a new type of bomb of enormous destructive power was possible. Roosevelt formed an advisory committee. Things moved slowly. Then Pearl Harbor happened, and the theoretical became urgent. August 13th, 1942. The Manhattan Engineer District is formally established under Brigadier General Leslie Groves, a man who had just finished overseeing the construction of the Pentagon and who approached nuclear physics with the same logistical ruthlessness he'd applied to concrete and steel. Groves selected J. Robert Oppenheimer to lead the scientific program, a theoretical physicist with no administrative experience, a left-wing political history that would later destroy him, and a mind that everyone who met him described as the most dazzling they had ever encountered. Los Alamos, New Mexico, a mesa in the high desert, a secret city that did not officially exist. Niels Bohr, Enrico Fermi, Hans Bethe, Klaus Fuchs, who was, though no one knew it yet, simultaneously passing technical details to Soviet intelligence. 3 years, $2 billion, 2 weapons, little boy, a uranium bomb. Fat Man, a plutonium bomb with an implosion design so precise that its timing had to be accurate to within a millionth of a second. Here's what almost never gets told in the standard version of this story. By 1945, as the weapons moved from theoretical to real, a significant number of the physicists at Los Alamos were deeply troubled. Leo Szilard, the man whose letter had started all of this, circulated a petition in July 1945, signed by 69 scientists. It urged that Japan be given an explicit demonstration of the bomb before it was used on a populated city. General Groves suppressed the petition. It never reached Truman. The scientists who signed it didn't learn this until much later. And then there was James Franck, a German Jewish physicist, a Nobel laureate, a man who had won the Iron Cross fighting for Germany in World War I, and then fled when Hitler came to power. In June 1945, he chaired a committee that produced what's known as the Franck Report, 11 pages. One of the most important documents of the 20th century and almost no one has read it. The Frank report argued, with careful scientific logic, that using the bomb without warning would be a catastrophic strategic mistake. Not just morally, practically. It predicted that the Soviet Union would develop their own bomb within a few years. It predicted a nuclear arms race. It proposed a demonstration on an uninhabited area, witnessed by international observers, including Japanese representatives. The report was reviewed by Oppenheimer's scientific panel. Their conclusion, they could propose no demonstration likely to end the war and saw no acceptable alternative to direct military use. The Frank report was filed. The demonstration option was closed. The reasoning behind rejecting the demonstration was never as airtight as the official response suggested. What if the bomb was a dud? What if Japan still refused to surrender? These were real concerns, but they were concerns about logistics and credibility, not about the fundamental question the Frank report was asking. Do we have the right to do this without warning? That question was not seriously engaged. What the interim committee did spend time on, and this is in the declassified record, was whether to give Japan advance warning to allow evacuation. This option was explicitly raised and explicitly rejected on the grounds that a warning might allow Japan to move American prisoners of war into the target area. There were 12 American POWs in Hiroshima on August 6th. They died in the blast along with everyone else. The warning that might have saved 70,000 Japanese civilians was rejected in part to protect American prisoners, who were then killed anyway. I checked that 3 times before I said it. It is in the record. The Target Committee met 3 times in the spring of 1945. They had criteria. The target city needed to be large enough to accurately assess the bomb's effects. It had to contain war-related industry. And critically, it had to have not been significantly damaged by conventional bombing, because the whole point was to measure what the atomic bomb could do on its own. Hiroshima fit every criterion, a city of approximately 350,000 people, headquarters of the Second Army, sitting on a flat river delta, surrounded by hills, which the committee's physicists understood would amplify the blast, reflecting the shock wave back toward the city center. A city of 350,000 people was preserved from conventional bombing so that it could be destroyed by an atomic one. July 16, 1945. 5:29 a.m., the Jornada del Muerto Desert, the Journey of the Dead Man, the Trinity test, the first detonation of a nuclear device in human history. Yield, approximately 21 kilotons. The steel tower was vaporized. The desert sand fused into glass. A new mineral, trinitite, radioactive and green, that you can still find today. Oppenheimer, watching from a bunker miles away, quoted the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." His colleague Kenneth Bainbridge, the test director, said something possibly more honest. He turned to Oppenheimer and said, "Now we are all sons of bitches." August 6th, the Enola Gay lifts off from Tinian Island. 11 crew members, a uranium bomb in the bay, 4 hours and 30 minutes to Hiroshima. The crew had been given cyanide tablets, not as symbolism, as a practical precaution. If they were captured, they carried knowledge about the world's most secret weapon. Every man had decided before takeoff that he would swallow his tablet rather than be interrogated. They flew 4 hours over the Pacific carrying both the bomb and that decision. Navigator Theodore Van Kirk was 24 years old. He maintained publicly for the rest of his life that the mission was justified. But in a 2005 interview, he said something I keep coming back to. He said, "If I had thought about it the way I think about it now, I'm not sure I could have done it." At 7:09 a.m., the weather reconnaissance plane over Hiroshima radioed back. Cloud cover less than 3/10, bomb primary. Hiroshima was clear. At 8:09 a.m., the Enola Gay began its final bombing run. Bombardier Major Thomas Farabee acquired the Ayoy Bridge in the Crosshair, a T-shaped bridge, visible, distinctive, the planned aiming point. The city spread beneath him, its rivers, its streets, its morning traffic, its 350,000 people going about their Tuesday. At 8:15 a.m., in 17 seconds, the bomb released. The Enola Gay lurched upward, 9,000 pounds lighter. Tibbets banked into a sharp diving turn, the escape maneuver they'd practiced, to put maximum distance between the aircraft and the blast. 43 seconds. That is how long Miyoko had. She didn't know the clock was running. Nobody in Hiroshima did. At 600 meters above the Shima Surgical Clinic, the firing mechanism activated. A conventional explosive propelled uranium into uranium. Critical mass achieved. Chain reaction. In less than a microsecond, the energy of 15 kilotons of TNT was released at a single point above the center of a city. Setsuko Thurlow was 13 years old and 1.8 kilometers from the hypocenter. She remembers a flash of blinding white light. Not sound, not heat. Light so total and instantaneous it preceded every other sensation. Then she was in the air, then under rubble, then darkness, dust, and a sound she described 70 years later as the city collapsing into itself. Everyone within roughly 500 meters of the hypocenter died almost instantaneously. The heat at the center exceeded several thousand degrees. At that temperature, the human body does not burn. It does not char. It ceases to exist as a solid object. People closest to the center left only shadows. Their silhouettes burned into stone steps and granite walls by the thermal pulse while their bodies were consumed. The steps of the Sumitomo Bank, 250 meters from the hypocenter, preserve the shadow of a person sitting there waiting for the bank to open. That person's name is not known. They were waiting for a bank to open on a Tuesday morning. That is the last thing they ever did. Setsuko was pulled from the rubble. Outside, she found a city she did not recognize. People whose skin was hanging from their bodies in sheets, faces so swollen by burns that their eyes had disappeared. Walking in silence toward the rivers. A slow procession that she later said looked like a parade of ghosts. She saw a woman carrying what she thought was a bundle. Then she understood it was a baby. The baby was silent in the way that meant it was no longer alive. She was 13 years old. At approximately 1 hour after detonation, rain began to fall. It was black. The detonation had vaporized enormous quantities of organic material, including human remains, and sucked them into the upper atmosphere. The resulting condensation fell as an oily, dark liquid. Survivors, desperate for water in the heat and ash, drank from puddles of black rain. Children held their mouths open to catch it. The black rain was intensely radioactive. They were thirsty, they drank. 3 days after Hiroshima, on August 9th, a second bomb fell on Nagasaki. This is usually compressed into one sentence, but what happened in between matters enormously. After Hiroshima, Japan's Supreme War Council met. The military faction argued the bomb was a single weapon, that the US might not have more, and that unconditional surrender was unacceptable. The peace faction argued the situation had fundamentally changed. The council was deadlocked. On August 8th, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan and immediately invaded Manchuria, the hope of Soviet mediation, gone overnight. On August 9th, before Japan had formally responded to Hiroshima, the second bomb fell. Here's what almost no one tells you about that second bomb. The order authorizing atomic strikes was issued by Truman on July 25th. It authorized the first bomb, and then additional bombs as soon as made ready. It was a standing order. The second bomb did not require a second presidential decision. Nagasaki was not a separate choice. It was the automatic continuation of existing authorization, executed while Japan's leadership was still processing Hiroshima. Truman, when he learned of Nagasaki, privately ordered a pause. A note in Commerce Secretary Henry Wallace's records quotes Truman saying, "The thought of wiping out another 100,000 people was too horrible, and that he didn't like the idea of killing all those kids." That sentiment arrived one bomb too late. Japan surrendered on August 15th. The war ended, and the world the bomb created began. By 1949, the Soviet Union had tested their own atomic bomb, exactly as the Frank Report predicted they would. The arms race was underway. By 1952, the United States tested the hydrogen bomb. Yield, 10 megatons, 670 times the yield of the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima. By the time Oppenheimer's security clearance was revoked in 1954, stripped by the same government he had served by men who bore personal grudges, in a process that historians now largely acknowledge was a prosecution rather than an inquiry. Both superpowers possessed weapons capable of destroying not a city but a region. The man who built the bomb was formally exonerated by the U.S. Department of Energy in December 2022. 55 years after his death, October 27, 1962, a Soviet submarine designated B-59 is at depth in the Caribbean Sea, cut off from radio contact, being depth charged by American naval vessels. The captain, Savitsky, concludes war has started. He orders the nuclear torpedo, 15 kilotons, the same yield as Little Boy, prepared for firing. There were 3 officers on that submarine who had to agree to launch. 2 agreed. The third, War Flotilla Commander Vasily Arkhipov, refused. He argued for surfacing, for patience. After a confrontation that witnesses describe as intense, the captain stood down. Vasily Arkhipov is not a household name. He is the reason you are alive to read this. September 1983, Soviet early warning satellite OKO reports that the United States has launched 5 intercontinental ballistic missiles. Duty officer Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov's standing orders. Reported up the chain immediately. An immediate report triggers Soviet response protocol. Minutes to decide whether to launch a retaliatory strike. Petrov did not report it. He reasoned, 5 missiles is too few for a real first strike. A genuine American launch would involve hundreds. He waited. The ground radar showed nothing. It was a malfunction. Sunlight reflecting off clouds in a way the system hadn't been designed to handle. Petrov was not celebrated. He was reassigned. He received no commendation. He died in 2017. His death was not reported by Russian state media. The man who may have prevented nuclear war received no official recognition from the government he served. Think about that. Here is what this story resolves, and what it doesn't. It does not resolve whether Truman made the right decision. Serious historians still disagree, and the disagreement is not between people who take the evidence seriously and people who don't. It's between people who weigh the same evidence differently. What the record does show, beyond serious dispute, is this. The decision was made inside a framework that treated a city of 350,000 people as an acceptable means to a strategic end. That rejected the warning option and the demonstration option without fully engaging with their moral weight. That suppressed the petition of 69 scientists who asked for exactly the deliberation the decision deserved. And then, in the decades that followed, built an entire global architecture of deterrence on Hiroshima's proof of concept, without adequately reckoning with the near misses. With Arkhipov, with Petrov, with the NORAD training tape that for 6 minutes convinced the system that 220 Soviet missiles were inbound. These were not systemic safeguards. They were individual human decisions made under extreme stress and incomplete information that happened to go the right way. Today, the world's 9 nuclear-armed states possess approximately 12,500 nuclear warheads. Approximately 2,000 are on high alert, launchable within minutes. The combined yield of currently deployed weapons is not measurable in Hiroshima's. It is measurable in civilizations. That number exists in a direct line from the Target Committee's criteria, from Farabi's crosshairs on the Aoi Bridge, from Miyoko in her white blouse walking to school. In 1966, the Hiroshima City Council voted to preserve the atomic bomb dome. The building that should not have survived, standing 160 meters from the hypocenter, its iron skeleton stripped bare. They chose to let the ruin remain as a witness. Setsuko Thurlow has been telling her story for 80 years, in classrooms, in parliaments, at the United Nations. In 2017, she stood before the Nobel Committee in Oslo, 85 years old, speaking without notes, and said, each person had a name. Each person was loved by someone. She was talking about 140,000 people. She was talking about Miyoko. In 2017, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons was adopted by 122 nations. No nuclear-armed state signed it. The nuclear powers noted it, declined to join it, and continued maintaining their arsenals on hair-trigger alert. Setsuko wept when the treaty passed. Not because she believed it would immediately disarm anyone. She wept because 122 nations had finally written down what she already knew. The dome is still standing. The cranes are still coming. The warheads are still on alert. The distance between those three facts is the distance that this story, every document, every name, every clock stopped at 8:15, has been trying for 80 years to close. If this story stayed with you, drop a comment. Tell me the moment you couldn't let go of, the shadow on the bank steps, Arkhipov saying no, Petrov waiting in the dark, Setsuko at the Nobel podium, Sadako's 644 cranes. Tell me, because the point of knowing this is not to hold it alone. History remembers those who listen. Join Dark History Archives and become part of the stories that still echo through time. Subscribe, like, share.